This is Timothy McVeigh, or you might know him as the Oklahoma City bomber. In less than 24 hours, he will be executed by lethal injection, becoming the first federal inmate to face death in nearly 4 decades. Locked in a cell no larger than a parking space, a concrete box with a narrow bed, metal toilet, and a small window barely allowing any light, he waits. Every distant clank of a door, every echoing footstep and the hum of fluorescent lights are amplified in the silence. Each second stretches, every minute bringing him closer to the inevitable. No appeals, no last-minute miracles, just a steady march of time. This is the last day of death row inmate Timothy McVeigh. On April 19, 1995, 26-year-old Timothy James McVeigh, a former US Army soldier, drove a rental truck packed with over 4,800 pounds of ammonium nitrate, nitromethane, and a diesel fuel mixture into Oklahoma City. Among the items McVeigh carried with him that day was an envelope containing pages from the Turner Diaries, a fictional account of white supremacists who incite a revolution by blowing up the FBI headquarters, alongside quotes about tyranny and liberty by other famous writers. He would have appeared no different than any other person driving a truck in the early morning hours. The only real hint to what he was about to do was his t-shirt, which displayed the words "Sic semper tyrannis," the phrase attributed to Brutus as he assassinated Julius Caesar and later shouted by John Wilkes Booth after killing Abraham Lincoln. At 8:57 a.m., a security camera recorded McVeigh's truck heading toward the Murrah Federal Building, which contained offices for a wide variety of agencies, including the DEA and ATF. An estimated 646 people were inside the building at the time. McVeigh parked the truck directly beneath the building's daycare center, exited the vehicle, and locked the doors. At 9:02 a.m., the truck bomb detonated in front of the building's north side. The explosion was catastrophic. In total, it left 168 people dead, 19 of whom were children. Hundreds more were injured, and the blast destroyed or damaged 324 buildings within a 4-block radius. McVeigh was arrested within 90 minutes of the explosion, when he was stopped by an Oklahoma state trooper for driving without a license plate and carrying a concealed weapon. In the following months, federal agents uncovered incriminating evidence at McVeigh's father's home, including bomb-making materials and a hand-drawn map of downtown Oklahoma City. Nearly 2 years later, on June 2, 1997, he would be found guilty on all counts and sentenced to death. The United States is the largest, most powerful, and most influential economy on Earth. Often touting itself as the leader of the free world, it has an immense impact on Western culture, frequently setting the standard for progress, human rights, and other major issues. Yet the United States is also a paradox. For all its concern with human rights elsewhere, it houses a whopping 20% of the world's incarcerated population. Across the country, for every 100,000 people, more than 600 of them are in jail or prison, vastly more than any other nation, developed or otherwise. More significantly, the US is one of the only 2 G7 countries to still employ the death penalty, the other being Japan. In 2023, 18 people were executed across the United States, the same number as the year before. Perhaps most egregious of all is the fact that the average death row prisoner waits about 20 years between sentencing and execution, a wait that can have a significant effect on their mental health. Life on death row in the United States is marked by isolation, uncertainty, and profound psychological distress. McVeigh would typically spend 23 hours a day in solitary confinement, shut away in small cells with minimal human interaction. While conditions can vary from state to state, the routine is generally monotonous and heavily restricted, with limited access to recreational activities or distractions of any kind. In McVeigh's case, he was placed in the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, commonly known as ATMAX or Supermax. This ultra-high security prison is designed to house the most dangerous inmates in near total isolation. McVeigh spent his days and nights on Bombers Row, a section of the prison designated for inmates convicted of high-profile bombing attacks. Here, he was housed alongside his accomplice, Terry Nichols, who helped plan the Oklahoma City bombing, and Ted Kaczynski, the infamous Unabomber. His cell was 7 feet by 12 feet and featured a toilet and sink, a 4-inch wide window, and an immovable bed that could also function as a desk. AdMax inmates were provided with a small in-cell shower unit set to a timer. McVeigh was allowed visitors, but these were closely monitored. Due to the abhorrent nature of what he had done, most of his visits were from lawyers working on his appeals. As a solitary person, McVeigh reportedly preferred the lack of interaction. However, he did grant interviews to select journalists, including a famous interview with 60 Minutes.
Maybe one of the benefits of me talking to you today is that you'll see that maybe not everything is true that you've heard about me.
For example, what's not true?
Well, am I pure evil? Am I the face of terror sitting here in front of you? Or am I able to talk to you man to man?
Whatever his mental state might have been leading up to his imprisonment, it's almost certain to have deteriorated once inside the AdMax. Studies show that the psychological impact of awaiting execution is immense, with most death row inmates suffering from severe mental health issues, including depression, anxiety, and a pervasive sense of hopelessness. Psychologists argue that the constant awareness of their impending execution, coupled with the uncertainty of when it will happen due to lengthy appeals processes, can lead to what is known as death row syndrome, a condition characterized by extreme psychological distress. By 1999, McVeigh dropped his remaining appeals, stating that he would rather die sooner than linger in isolation for another 10 to 15 years. Soon after, he was transferred to federal death row at USP Terre Haute. On January 16, 2001, the Bureau of Prisons set his execution date as June 11th. The day before his execution, Timothy McVeigh sent a letter to the Buffalo News expressing his indifference to the loss of life caused by his actions, stating, "I am sorry these people had to lose their lives, but that's the nature of the beast. If there is a hell, then I will be in good company with a lot of fighter pilots who also had to bomb innocents to win the war." Not only was McVeigh remorseless, but he seemed genuinely happy to be facing his fate. A former Catholic, he spoke with a chaplain and made sure he was administered Catholic last rites. He gave confession, after which the chaplain anointed him with holy oil while reciting prayers. He also received communion before receiving an apostolic pardon. For his last meal, McVeigh chose 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. After finishing them, he spent the evening watching television until about 9 p.m. Guards reported that he was restless and barely slept. At around 3 in the morning, he resumed watching TV until his attorney arrived. Shortly before the execution time, 7 a.m., he was chained and taken out of his cell for the last time. There were about 10 official witnesses present in the execution chamber. These included representatives from the federal government, law enforcement, and McVeigh's attorneys. A larger group of around 300 survivors and family members of the victims of the Oklahoma City bombing were able to watch the execution via closed-circuit television. Though he declined to speak when given the opportunity, McVeigh had prepared a handwritten transcription of the 19th century poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. The poem's opening lines read, "Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul." At 7:14 a.m. on June 11th, 2001, McVeigh was executed by lethal injection. The process was swift. Within 4 minutes of the first drug's administration, he was pronounced dead. His eyes remained open the entire time. McVeigh's body was later cremated, and his ashes were given to his lawyer, who kept their final destination private. The harsh conditions on death row have been widely criticized by human rights organizations, with some arguing that the prolonged period between sentencing and execution, sometimes spanning decades, constitutes cruel and unusual punishment. This was precisely what McVeigh sought to avoid in waiving his appeals. Despite countless criticisms, the US penal system remains largely unchanged, forcing thousands of inmates to endure the harsh realities of death row until they finally face their inevitable fate.